Okay, this is me reloading 28 gauge HS shot shells, as you can see here, on a 28 gauge Mec Sizemaster reloader. I am using Noble Sport 209s, which are the equivalent, or Noble 209 primers, which are the equivalent of Winchester 209 primers, or CCI primers. CCI primers, actually, they're not the same thing, but CCI primers, when I load the same amount of powder with CCI primers, I get a higher burning temperature on my powder. So I had some trouble with just too much residue and being a pain in the butt to clean the barrel. So I switched primers with the same powder weight to make it hotter and hopefully have less residue. But this is just kind of a reloading guide for anybody that needs it, because when we started out there wasn't much like this. But basically what you need to do is when you get your reloader, you need to find an optimal load, or find 4 or 5 optimal loads that you would like to load, and then you need to look at your bushing sizes. Now if you go to Hodgson.com, or actually if you type in Mec bushing sizes on Google or Live Search or any search engine, you'll find a bushing size chart for Mec, and what that does is it tells you how many grains of powder will be dispensed in the shot shell with that specific bushing. The thing is, it varies from powder to powder because the grains of powder are smaller and larger, more fine and less fine, depending on the type of powder. For like Hodgson long shot and universal, there's going to be more universal powder bushing than long shot, because long shot has larger powder flakes. Actually, they're kind of circular. So actually, today we're loading with Hodgson powder. We're loading it's a 14.6 grain load, but we're about 14.5, so we can load both with the Winchester 209s and with the CCIs, because the CCI requires 14.5 grains of powder. Good idea to always weigh your first powder charge. Now I've already done that, so I don't need to do it because it takes a while, because this has to balance out. It's so sensitive. So yes, this is kind of broken, but I rebalanced it with a little weight that you can turn right here, so it balances out fine. But so I'm also loading with Winchester AA 28 gauge HS watts. Now the difference is between AA and HS. HSs have slightly larger holes. AAs have slightly smaller, and I can't remember exactly what the reasoning was for making the hull slightly bigger. But it actually helps. They said you could use 0 wad pressure when loading this bogus. I guess I should explain what wad pressure is. Wad pressure on a Mec reloader is adjusted right here. You see this little gauge. When you put the wad in, when you load, this tells you how many pounds of pressure this is applying on the wad, because wad pressure, you want to make sure you have enough where you're maybe just barely bending the wad, but you don't want to buckle the wad, because that'll really hurt your performance. But you want to have wad pressure, because if that wad is not adequately seated in the shot shell, there'll be too much open space and the powder will not reach its maximum pressure, and you'll get what we call a dud. Or and the severity of duds varies. I mean, sometimes you'll get wads stuck in the barrel, so it's, and other times they'll go off and shoot just fine, but they leave a ton of residue, and they sound different too, so you'll know if you have a dud, definitely. So, try to avoid that. Adjust your wad pressure as necessary. And you can look to see if the wad's being buckled by just simply going up to a, low light bulb and just candling it, like they do with chicken eggs, to see how the embryo's developing. You can look in there, and it won't show up very well on this camera. But maybe if I do this, see, I can see through there. I can see, from my point of view, I can see the wad, and it's loading perfectly. So I've got no problems. But if it's buckling too much, you need to take that wad pressure off, and just a slight buckle will do it. So now we'll actually go to the reloading process with the Sizemaster Mec reloader. If I can find a hole. Crap. Here we go. Okay. So, yeah, I forgot to grab more HS holes that we just shot. So, here is a AA HS hole. It's not been reloaded yet, you can see. So the first thing we need to do is take it into the resizer / primer punch, which you see right here, and we're going to bring it down and punch the primer. Now, as you'll see, this primer does not come out. The reason is, if you load with Noble Sport primers, you will always, they're always larger than any other primer. So the primer punch will probably not punch them out very well. So all you need to do is take pliers or some sort. These are actually wire cutters, but that's okay. And I need to set the camera down for a second. Twist out the primer and then put it in. Now normally it would take a lot less longer, but I'm trying to show this for demonstration purposes. And there's a catch tray underneath there, so you can just drop it in. Okay, so the next step is to seat the new primer. So we're going to load the Noble Sport, which is like a Winchester 209. I don't want to reload the CCIs because these are all 209s and I need to shoot them first before I start loading those CCIs. Okay, so now we're going to bring it down. Normally there is an automatic primer dispenser right here, but we took it off because it's more trouble than it's worth. Yeah, so I recommend just plopping it in by hand because it's a pain in the butt, quite frankly. So now the shell comes down and the primer's seated. Now always check to make sure you have a nice good seat on there, because you never want to because if it's not in all the way, it could catch in a semi-automatic, could pull out, powder could dump everywhere. Long story short, not good. So just always check that. Now we're going to go to the powder loading. We're going to come down and then always tap the powder jar to make sure all the powder that's required is in the bushing. So 1, 2, then slide the charge bar over and you heard the powder dump in. Now you need to come back up. Now this shell locking thing here, always just push it. You have to push it down to lock the shell anyways in the first place. But it comes up a little bit when you come up after dumping the powder. So it's always a good idea to make sure, because sometimes that wad won't go in cleanly if it's not all the way locked down. So just make sure it's all the way locked down after you dump the powder in. Okay, so the next step, this is going to be fun to film, is to take your wad and place it on the dispenser. And then push it down in. Okay, so now the wad's in there. Do not come back up because you'll pull that wad out. So we do not want to come back up from the stroke. So while it's down here, push your charge bar over and now you get shot. Okay, now we move on to the first crimping station. So what happens here is all the edges are going to be folded up. The 6 points of the crimp are going to be folded up, and then it's going to be pressed down and finished by the stamper part. So it's going to be first stage. Now I did that twice and I'm actually going to do it a third time because this looks like it wasn't going to crimp very well. It's an older shell. As the crimp wears, it tends to not crimp as well, and you might get something like this, which that happens occasionally. It's still shootable out of like a over and under side by side, but it's annoying. So now we go down again. And perfect. We have a perfect crimp right here. Okay. So now that's a fully reloaded shot shell. That's just a guide on how to reload. Let's see. Common question. What happens if I don't have a convenient bushing to dispense the proper powder needed or required for the particular recipe that you're using? That's easy. We actually had to do this for our load to get down to 14.5 grains because we were having trouble with the. We had a bushing that loaded 14.9. So what we did was we took the bushing out and we super glued paper clips in it. We cut paper clips and super glued the straight, edges in there, around there, and so reduced the amount of powder that the bushing can hold. And yes, that did work. So you can jimmy rig bushings like that, but just be very careful when you do it. But yeah, there's not always going to be, in fact, there's almost never a convenient bushing. Like 14.9, you could load 14.9 and be done with it, if you don't feel like jimmy rigging. So if you don't feel like jimmy rigging, find a load that matches evenly with the amount of powder to dispense. Or if you're about 1/10 of a grain under in powder weight, you can still load that load. Just never load 1/10 of a grain under, or 1/10 of a grain over. Always under. Don't exceed more than 1/10 under, because the burn characteristics change, and believe me, it's not a constant thing. It's not just more powder. It's wad. The wad and primer are actually the two biggest variables of reloading. And if you look at reloading data, you'll see that. It's not just constant more powder equals more velocity. No, it's a lot more than that. Like, for instance, these CCI primers, I just told you, they make it burn hotter. If I reload with these Winchester 209s, or they're Noble Sport 209s, but really the same thing, they create 9,700 PSI in that shell. If I reload with CCI, they create 10,500 PSI with that same amount of powder and same wad. So, see, the primers have different characteristics. So the primer and the wads are very, very, very important. And my cat likes reloading too. Stitch, you like reloading? Okay. So, that's just a basic guide on reloading. So, just leave any comments or any questions you might have, and I'll talk to you later.